We have this growing crisis around the world. Today, 76 million people are internally displaced, people who have been displaced, wrenched from their homes, lost their houses, lost their livelihoods, lost their communities, and have moved to seek sanctuary. These 76 million people have not crossed a border. They are not refugees. They are not migrants. They are what we call internally displaced people. They are displaced inside their own country. We are trying to support those millions of people around the world in new ways, but the numbers keep climbing, and it challenges a lot of our systems. It challenges a lot of governments in terms of how they manage that. My job is to try and figure out how we can do this better, harnessing all of the assets of the UN system, working with governments differently, working with international financial institutions, and bringing together a much stronger coalition of actors to support these internally displaced people around the world. Well, Colombia is a good story and a bad story. It's the bad side of it, of course, is that unfortunately, Colombia is still amongst those countries around the world with the greatest number of internally displaced people. At least 7 to 8 million displaced people inside Colombia. Many of them have, as I said, for decades. And new numbers still, unfortunately. The story is not over. Last year, almost 300,000 newly displaced people joined these ranks. So it remains a country with an enormous displacement challenge, not very well understood. Number 5 globally, unfortunately, in this ranking that no one wants to be at the top of. But there's a lot of good things to say about Colombia too, because this is a country which has taken this problem very seriously. It has a strong constitutional court, and we are here to celebrate, in fact, the 20th anniversary of a landmark constitutional court decision on IDPs. This is a country where the government is investing a lot of resources into this issue. Somewhere around $1 billion a year is being invested in internally displaced people by the state. This is a country that is really tracking this situation very, very closely. It has a big infrastructure of organizations trying to provide assistance to internally displaced people. So Colombia is both an enormous challenge amongst the global list of displacement affected countries, but also a place where we can do a lot, where we can learn a lot, where we can really support the government to try and bring these numbers down. Well, this landmark decision by the Constitutional Court 20 years ago essentially declared the situation of internally displaced people at the time in Colombia as a state of unconstitutional situation, i.e. extraordinary circumstances, which essentially, underlined that the state had really failed on its contract to these citizens, that they were confronting very deep structural challenges as a result of forces over which they had no control, for which they have no responsibility, and the state really has a tremendous, therefore, obligation to try and fix this. And that has unleashed periodically, every year actually, a kind of reporting process where the state responds to the court on what it's done, the court analyzes whether it's satisfied, and this iterative process ever since in these 20 years as the state has become more and more effective at trying to respond to this problem. And the court has been more and more vigilant to make sure that the rights of IDPs are protected and respected. And in this sense, Colombia has, I would say, the strongest legal framework of any country in the world in terms of confronting this issue. But the problem is a stubborn issue. There were only 2.5 million IDPs 20 years ago when that constitutional court decision was made. Today, as I said, we're in the vicinity of 8 million IDPs. And the problem here is not only the growth, but also that people are getting stuck in that status of being internally displaced for years and years. So our work in Colombia with the UN team is really to help the government break this cycle of figuring out what will it take to take an IDP out of their displacement and resolve their situation once and for all. What kind of support do they need on housing, on livelihoods, on access to services, on justice and compensation? It's a complicated process, but this is a government that seems very committed to trying to make that breakthrough. Well, we have, as you know, lots of different operations, but with me, a small team within the UN is really focused on this issue of support to government on the displacement issue, and specifically on finding solutions for internally displaced people. So we work at the center in Bogota with this victims unit, but most importantly, we're working with mayors at the municipality level to help them integrate this task of solutions for IDPs into their local development plans so that together we can move these numbers. We have 1,500 staff of the UN based outside Bogota, I learned, which is great. This is really an army for good that can support those mayors in the work that they need to do to really make this happen. What is interesting in Colombia is that we have quite a large humanitarian caseload, if you will, that's been here for years, whether it's Venezuelan migrants, whether it's Colombian internally displaced persons. There's been a big humanitarian footprint. That means we have a lot of boots on the ground outside Bogota. And we need to turn that into a tremendous value proposition for the government. Not keep going on an emergency footing, but figure out how do we harness all of that expertise, that local knowledge of UN staff outside Bogota. How do we harness that to support local governments to really address some of these tough problems? They understand the setting, they have relationships with the government, and it's not about replacing, it's about accompanying governments at that local level to really make a difference. And at the end of the day, that's where it really matters, right? The peace process in Colombia, the development process in Colombia, the solutions for internally displaced people, they don't happen in Bogota as such, they really happen out there. My real goal is to make sure that this collaboration we have on solutions for Colombia's millions of internally displaced people really starts to gather momentum. We don't want just plans, we want to start implementing. We need to raise money, we need to start building, we need to start collaborating at that local level. So for me, it's all about the momentum of pushing this issue forward and making sure that the UN is there for the government of Colombia over the coming months and years. I guess the message is that the UN is here to support you on this issue. Let's look out for some of the most vulnerable people in this country. They are internally displaced. They've gone through far too much. They've been in limbo for far too long. Let's work together and try and resolve this thorny problem. I'm sure we can do it.